1. Nantai in mourning. Generations have passed since the Ryū Wars, the age when the great dragons and people split and became mortal foes. Yet the Nantai people, my people, remain. I have never met one of the Ryū, the dragons of old, nor have I felt the ties of companionship, but our people's lessons were ingrained. The Ryū bond represented the purest variety of evil. From before I gained knowledge of letters, my sisters and I clung to stories father had told. Karin, Yasmin, and I gathered at his feet near the throne, crafted from the last dragon's skin and bone and scale. And we listened to Tenyo Azarine read from Stormkeep's annals. His voice had resonated in my blood as he'd painted the history of companionship, the most toxic of bonds between a dragon and a person. The stories had been as exciting as they were dangerous. During the time at my father's heel, I'd been too young to understand or wield my storm sorcery with any bit of control. But my sisters would stir small gusts of wind, animating dyed sands to enact the scenes. Between father's booming narration and the miniature scenes, I'd giggle and clap and thoroughly enjoy the show. Over the course of the histories read, it became clear that the Ryū bond drove people to commit acts unimaginable. Father wouldn't read to us of the treachery, but he did share one story, a story that kept me awake in the dark hours for many moons. The story of the people's first emperor, Tenyo Makanine, the Scarred. After surviving the ritual that peeled away the soul-deep bond between him and the blackest dragon, Kuroi Dragon, he wore the scars for the remainder of his days and walked hunchbacked, limping as he went. I closed and reopened my eyes slowly, returning to my chambers, to the now, and to myself, my shoulders laden under the weight of both the memory and the mourning robes my attendants were draping about my shoulders. The material well positioned, Mother Feathergala scurried to the adjacent room to retrieve the lengths of fabric that would secure the garments and further restrict my ability to breathe easily. Desperate to put away the heavy garments prescribed for the 60 days and nights of mourning my father had declared in the wake of my mother's death, I asked, "How many more?" I'd asked the same question every morn as they attended to my attire. Yet my friend and attendant answered readily. "A dozen days remain, Lady Mairynne." Jessa bobbed in deference to my impending position. I clasped her shoulders and waited for her gaze to lift, to meet mine, then said, "Please don't treat me so. I'm the same person I was 10 days ago, before Tenyo Mairynne Evangale went missing, and I'll be the same person tomorrow and after this period of mourning has passed." "Yes, Lady Mary," I squeezed to silence her formal objection. Looking sternly into her worried eyes, I said, "Simply Mairynne, the same Mairynne who has been at your side since we were younglings." When her tension eased, mine did the same. I gulped air, rolling my shoulders back to support the robe's weight. Employed by my parents to care for their royal children, and known to us as Mother Feathergala, Jessa's blooded mother returned to my chambers. She looked small in comparison to the swaths of belting material overflowing her grasp, but it didn't appear a burden. She used her sorcery, stirred a minor wind to carry the heavy belts, and she simply guided them toward the bed. I released my dear friend and turned to face the mirror. The royal mourning garments were extensive, so Jessa went to help. As they returned, I lifted my arms to receive the finishing touches. To my attendants and to the Holy Triad, should they be listening, I raised my chin and voice. "How are the city's people handling the loss? And the people beyond?" Mother Feathergala revolved around me, binding my body with the blessed robes, so I might feel embraced by my loved one lost. She worked proficiently and spoke with a cutting absence when she answered, "They await patiently, per tradition, and you shouldn't toil over the matter now. The Triad intends for you to focus on healing during the quiet time. Decreed by the blessed Emperor and respected by all castes and the casteless alike." In the long days while I waited idly, and more so within that moment, I felt inclined to curse the traditions, shun the robes, and escape the stony walls that bound me to the castle and citadel. I longed for action, to discover if others believed, as I did, that Father still lived. I yearned to see how the people were reacting to the loss of both their rulers. Still working to gain necessary confidence in my convictions, I spoke more quietly, with uncertainty, and voiced words that I dared not speak to anyone less trusted than Jessa and Mother Feathergala. With all that has happened, do you not believe the rituals selfish at all? Mother Feathergala finished securing the ends of the obi and came to face me, her eyes blinking, then widened with bewilderment. "Why ever would it be selfish, Mairynne?" Lowering my eyes, I smiled ruefully. Had I truly expected her to hold beliefs outside of those handed down for generations? My aging attendant wiped her palms on her apron and opened her arms to me with a smile. I fell willingly into her embrace as she offered me what comfort she could. But in the end, she pushed me away with a solemn look, misty eyes, and slight nod. "There, you're ready for the day. Your mother would be proud. Your father, too," she added. I swallowed against the sudden burn in my throat. Her gaze left mine as she inspected the belts, making tiny adjustments while I, too, gathered myself. I would not cry. I'd done enough of that since my mother's death. For my father to have disappeared so soon after, I felt cracked, as if a fissure ran through my soul. The realm seemed to feel the same, and the recovery of a people who had lost their leaders lurked in the wings as everyone respected one of our most sacred beliefs and waited for the rites of mourning to pass. While I loathed the clothing and sense of confinement, I also dreaded the completion of the 60 days and nights and the duty that awaited once morning had passed. I picked up my skirts and lumbered toward the door. "Mairynne," Mother Feathergale called, "we still need to bind your hair." Pushing my chin higher, I said, "I think I'll leave it loose." But I held a hand forward to halt the propriety. I would wear the clothing, but I refused the hair. Finishing my day with a headache from the constant pull was the last of my desires. Traditionally, the decision may have been blasphemous, but there were no formal ceremonies this day. Outside of going to the citadel, I wouldn't meet any of my people. My sisters and the Triad's priests could tolerate my small defiance. The older woman clasped her hands and put on a smile. "You have always been a headstrong child. Your mother and I have always been there to encourage your determination." She curtsied. "As you will." To my friend, I asked, "Jessa, will you walk with me?" She lifted her own robes of mourning, although significantly less encumbering than mine, and joined me at the door. I envied her for her lack of station, but I'd little choice as to my own. These walls held me, as did the propriety and custom. The robes simply ensured I couldn't breathe. Before leaving, I turned. "Thank you, Mother Feathergala, for everything." Despite my sense of suffocation, I'd been fortunate to have gained my majority having 2 motherly figures in my life. My best friend's mother, and the woman who had borne my sisters and me into the world. Before her death, Mairynne Evangale had possessed strength and compassion revered by all castes of our people. Nantai's casteless and small folk had also loved the empress, a fondness rulers before her couldn't claim. As I turned down the hall toward the bridge, I grasped the 2 small tokens that hung on a chain around my neck. One stone felt constantly warm against my skin, and the other constantly cold. The soldiers who found Mother had pulled the cold thing from her hand after recovering her twisted body from the border of the Evernight marshes near the Great Sands. The warm stone I had found on my father's pillow the morning he, Tenyo Azarine Evangale, had disappeared. Within Nantai's jewel city of Arashi, Storm's Keep Castle hugged the side of a cliff high above a great waterfall. We exited the castle proper onto a wide landing, then moved toward the bridge crossing high above Sundai Falls. Our steps carried us onward over the narrow bridge to the citadel beyond, where my sisters and I would meet with priests and receive updates on the upcoming rites. Though I'd grown up in the people's central city, I had no memories at Storm's Keep in which the sound of water flowing over stone did not provide ambiance. Even in the most remote corners of the castle, if I were to listen, I could have heard the whooshing and splashes. Now, as we slowly crossed the bridge over the falls, the ever-present sound soothed my nerves. Each tentative foot forward caused the bridge to sway, and I questioned my balance. Should I fall, I could call the wind to carry me to safety, but it would incite commotion and angst over my well-being amongst the people gathered below in the daylight hours. Today, I wished for privacy, and the need to face my sisters as well as the triad was burden enough. So I took care and held the rough rope railing as I walked shoulder to shoulder with Jessa. She, on the other hand, moved freely in her lightweight robes. Again, I envied her. "You seem distant today," Jessa said, turning to face me, then quickly back to our path. I breathed deeply and sighed. "My mind is clouded with what's needed to complete the rituals. Day 48, you said?" Yes. We only have 3 rites remaining, and then we can dispense with the sadness that hangs over our people." "Over your people, Lady Mairynne. Afterward, do you intend to prepare for ascension?" I stopped both walking and breathing, but my question spilled out anyway. "Why would you ask such a question so carelessly?" I said, scanning for onlookers. She fumbled to find decorum and the right response. "My apologies, Lady Mairynne. I just figured we were alone, and that the sounds of the falls would mask the question." I had wounded her. For her to have asked only reflected my own worry. I had scolded where I should not have. "No, Jessa, it is I who should apologize. My ascension is the expectation of the people, is it not?" Truly, this was no answer, but I hoped it was enough to appease her curiosity. It sufficed. She eased, looped an arm through mine, and offered her strength to supplement my own. Halfway across the bridge, I stopped and turned to face the falls. Mist wafted up on the wind from the rocks, cooling my face and stirring my loose hair. To my oldest friend, I said, "If, and that is a big if, I do, I've much to prepare over the next 12 days. I'm not ready to be empress, and I fear I am not truly ready for the burden." "Mairynne, there is reason. I know the reason behind all of this." Shaking my head, I grasped her hand and eased my words for her benefit. "My parents groomed me, along with my sisters, for this very thing. But the time came far sooner than I had thought." I paused, looking down at our clasped hands. "They, my parents, that is, were taken from us before their time." Jessa hugged me around the shoulders, her simple touch, silence, and acceptance offering more strength than she knew. "Anyway," I said at last, and a mite ruefully. "My remaining family awaits my arrival. We'd best be on our way." Inside the citadel, we turned to the right and made for the Triads' meeting chambers behind the temple proper. At a long table, the Triads' clergy sat in chairs, in a seemingly random pattern, each reading from a scroll. My sisters and their first advisors also awaited. Carine sat at the table's head, and I wondered how early she'd arrived to secure the seat of power. To her left, Yasmin leaned close to her betrothed, Nestrine. Upon my father's disappearance, my sisters had wasted no time in choosing and announcing their first advisors. The thought caused my stomach to churn. Nestrine had now been elevated to Yasmin's first advisor, yet they sat too close, too intimately for an official proceeding. Their manner had always been an open display of affection, and they paid little heed to the company present. Poised behind Carine, the powerful, more seductive Immarisel Sandisgal rested one hand on the back of my sister's chair. She, Carine's chosen, was almost too much to behold. Ebony hair flowing, one eye covered with a black veil, while the other peered back, an uncommonly piercing green. Merely looking upon her, I felt out of place in my own skin, and fought the urge to fidget. Wearing attire that mirrored my own, Carine stood and closed the distance between us. Having our father's height, she looked down, grasped my shoulders, and folded me into a hug. "Mairynne," she said, "how are you doing this morning?" "I do wish we didn't have to do this today," I answered. "But if we must, let us begin." Carine's glance flickered past me to Jessa, but returned quickly, and with a smile, she nudged me toward the chair at her right. "Sister, why is your hair unbound?" Yasmin surfaced from her whispers and flipped a hand in their oldest sister's direction. "Oh, Kari, let her be. This is our only obligation today." Across the table, I gave Yasmin a thankful but questioning stare. The elderly priest cleared his throat and rolled up his scroll. "With you all here, we may proceed." The other clergy, each given the Hologal name by tradition and raised to serve the Triad, followed his lead in stowing their reading. The much younger priestess said, "Edamine, we should excuse the advisors." The notes in Tasmin's voice rang high and clear, as she looked meaningfully from Nestrine to Immarisel, then to my friend Jessa. Though I had not announced a first advisor of my own, all assumed that I'd chosen my dearest friend. I had not, as I refused to accept that my father and our emperor wouldn't return. Jessa accepted her dismissal, but the others looked to my sisters, awaiting permission. Immarisel was the last to leave, and made a show of pulling closed the heavy double doors. Once alone with our holy council, the senior Hologal, Edamine, began with the traditional opening blessing of the Triad. "May Atun, the All-Seer, guide us today." Arline and Tasmin dipped their heads, acknowledging the tradition. Arline offered the second invocation. "May Otar, the Day-Seer, alight our way." "And may the Night-Seer, Selene, give us wisdom," Tasmin finished. "Arline, do you wish to begin?" Edamine held a shaky hand in the direction of Otar's high priest. "Yes, thank you." He sat straighter in his chair, folding his hands atop the table. "Otar has shown Kogo Mairynne Evangale the way to her next life. Time has passed enough that we may sweep the Mandala sands. Emissaries from the Fire Forgers have delivered the files. We have sorcerers at the ready to hold off any storms, so we may ensure Otar may gaze upon us. We are ready for the 8th and 9th rites to begin 3 days hence." I stifled the urge to groan at the thought of 2 long, sweltering days under the sun, overseeing the sweeping of the sands, and there would be no reprieve on the 3rd, as we handed out the files of the ritual sands to the people. My sisters and I listened with aplomb, as was our duty. Discussion continued between the Hologalas around positioning and other technical aspects required for the ceremony, and I exchanged looks with my sisters from time to time until the insignificant details had run their course. Tasmin moved on. As to the final rite, the caretakers are tending to the nymphs around the clock, keeping their ecosystem within the precise condition required to encourage the final transformation. The nymphs are preparing for their final molting cycle and are on schedule to emerge from the water and shed their skin just in time for the rite of release. Tasmin relaxed back in her chair as she finished, clearly satisfied with the status of her preparations for the Nantai rituals of mourning. In the swift pause that followed, Mairynne leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Very well," she said. "It seems all is on track to complete honoring our mother." Just as swiftly, she turned to me and pinned me with a sharp gaze. Instinctively, I tensed, feeling my fingers digging into the wooden arm of the chair. As I scanned the others in the room, every person's focus also rested on me. She continued, "Mairynne, are you prepared to tend to your duties once the rites are complete?" I swallowed, though my mouth felt suddenly dry. I'd foreseen this question, but that didn't make answering easier. Ultimately, I wasn't intent on abdication, only avoidance. If you inquire about my understanding, I'm versed in the expectation that we begin preparation for my ascension. "Expectation be damned to the hells," said Mairynne. "What I wonder is if you actually plan to begin the proceedings. It is clearly what Father wanted, him having written his directive into the Storm's Keep annals that you, his third daughter, shall be his successor to the throne of Storm's Keep." My shoulders tightened, my neck pinched, so I rolled my head to relieve the strain and sighed. While I adored my eldest sister, she could temper her rash demeanor with a smattering of tact. Leveling my voice as much as possible, I replied, "We have 12 sacred days remaining before I must face this decision, Carey. Can we tend to our grief for now?" Yasmin reached across the table to offer me a hand. I accepted and awaited her thoughts. Her gaze flitted to our older sister. Then, with a gentle smile, she said, "Of course, we will respect the rituals. But you should know that our people are becoming lost without a leader. Our advisors say there have been some disturbances in the streets, and we've heard rumors from the other castes. The matter of unrest within the people concerned me more than my place on the throne. However, I needed time." 12 days, I responded, rigid and unmoving as I stated my will. "Only then will I address the topic of inheritance." "You must at least name your first advisor officially and make the decree in the annals," Mairynne continued, seemingly searching for a way to force me to address my impending duty. "Jessa, though she is dear to you, is not an appropriate royal advisor." Facing her, I pressed my lips into a tight line. There was little clarity in my mind as to why she believed Immarizal or Nestrine met the so-called requirements, but now wasn't the time to discuss. Pressing that issue would have only ensnared me in further conversation about a topic I wasn't ready to address. I turned to the elderly priest at my right and asked, "Is there aught to discuss regarding the rites?" Edamine Hallowgal replied, "No, Lady Mairynne. We have concluded our business." I stood. The chair scraped against the floor as my momentum pushed it backward. My sisters both followed my cue. I hugged Mairynne formally, then Yasmin, who grabbed onto me and squeezed tight, showing the affection she wore in her very bones. As I broke the hug, I stated again, 12 days. It's not long. I value our sisterhood beyond what you will ever know. But this acceptance is mine and mine alone. I must come to it in my own time. Once I have decided, You both will be the first to know." On those words, I made for the doors. Hot moisture gathered about my belts as I pulled one door inward enough to squeeze through and make my escape. In the foyer, I turned toward the open-air sanctuary overlooking Stormskeep Falls, desperate for some relief. In my path, Imarizel stood. My level gaze rested at the hollow in her long, graceful throat. Clenching my teeth, I lifted my chin to make eye contact. Imarizel raised a hand and softly ran a long finger down my face, the trail she traced burning a line from near my eye, down and along my jawline. Against the urge to flinch away, I held myself in place and waited. "Your sister cares deeply for you, for the Evangale legacy, and for the Nantai people," she said, her voice deeper and more seductive than a woman's voice had a right to be. "I see many questions written on your face." Unclear as to what she suggested, I reminded myself that Tenyo Azarine's decree named me successor and trained my features into a mask of solemnity. Versed in the ways of Nantai politics, the woman before me carried a manner about her that embodied power and temptation. She used her height to exude an air of authority, while her curves dripped with sensuality, and the veil she wore covering one eye cast an air of mystery about her. In choosing her first advisor, my sister Karine clearly sought to use these skills to her advantage. As father had instructed us all, I measured my words. "Thank you, Imarizel. In these days, I take comfort in my sisters as we, along with the rest of the Nantai people, pay due respect to my mother's memory." "Yes." She clasped her hands behind her back, and her gaze dropped for only a moment before she continued. "Well, do remember that you must have trust in those who love you." I donned an appeasing smile and gave credit to the truth in her words. "Well put. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like some time in sanctuary with my thoughts." As I moved around her, Jessa stepped to my side. "Lady Mairynne," Imarizel called. I turned to see that Karine had joined her. Regally, they stood shoulder to shoulder as Imarizel added, "Karine and I both are to champion your path to the throne. Your advocates, if you will." She tipped her head forward in a move so small it almost escaped me. Yet now was no time to bend in my conviction. Giving a single nod, I passed through the grand archway, leaving them to their will, and my dear friend in my wake. Inside, I clasped both of Jessa's hands and asked her to wait without as well. I wished nothing more than to be alone with my thoughts and prayers to Attune and his children, Otar and Selene. Deeper within the citadel, each of the Holy Triad had a dedicated chapel. But I favored this sanctuary, a sheltered balcony with 3 altars overlooking the Sundai Falls. For time I didn't count, I knelt at Selene's altar and called a wind to bring mist from the falls and cool me as I contemplated. At intervals, I spoke aloud to the gods, seeking guidance. I received no answers to the questions in my mind. Attune didn't tell me why someone slayed my mother. Otar wouldn't grant me the knowledge of where my father had gone, and Selene gave me no guidance regarding my unsettling feeling that Tenyo Azarine still lived. Fighting a burning behind my eyes, I lifted my face to the skies and cried, "Father, what would you do in my place?" An unseen, but rich and familiar voice answered, "I know not what Tenyo Azarine would do." "Thalaja," I breathed, wiping a tear that had strayed down my cheek. I stood and moved in his direction. Arashi's first guard, Gensui Thalaja Northerngal, stepped from the shadows, from one of the apses set into the outer wall. Exempt from wearing full robes of mourning, storms keep guards dressed in light leathers, with a red sash from shoulder to hip, easily removed should the need arise. Weapons remained accessible.
Your robes flatter, but I do prefer your hair unbound, Thalaja said as he approached.
These robes are better suited to my sisters than they are to me. I moved in his direction, but before I reached him, he dropped his eyes and turned slightly away. The movement prevented the embrace I'd intended, and my shoulders felt heavy again, this time not from the robes. Will you not give me the comfort of holding me?
Lady Mairynne, you know it's blasphemous.
He ran a hand over his braids to the thong at the base of his skull. Flinching at the formality, I snapped, "We have done nothing blasphemous."
If anyone sees us in an embrace, my head would decorate the spikes at the Storm's Keep gates.
No one can persecute you for offering comfort in this time. I searched his face. He warned me off with a look and said,
That my mother is a storm sorcerer is insignificant here. That she chose a frostfighter as my father makes me unworthy. There is the matter of contamination that is punishable only by death.
Thalaja, I huffed, you know that I do not hold with the caste beliefs, and you know that my mother and father supported my stance.
And how has that worked for them?
He challenged, while rubbing a gloved thumb over the hilt of his scimitar. Seconds later, he realized the splinter his words had pushed under my skin.
I'm sorry.
He dropped his head and silently moved to the railing beyond the altars, leaning over toward the falls. I joined him. As he turned to face me, I could feel his eyes, and unable to handle the silence, I pressed. Why must such things come between people drawn to one another? My words were more of a complaint than a question. He answered anyway.
Mairynne, you know how to change this.
I turned to him abruptly and questioned, Not you too? Everyone pressed for my ascension, but I'd hoped the man who'd become a fixture in my life, as our protector, wouldn't join causes with the masses. Thalaja looked down.
It is not my place to counsel you, but royal decrees are our only mechanism for change amidst our people. An emperor or empress must formally write them into the annals under the Halogala's supervision. I see little other course of action.
Though his motivations were different, he'd joined in the opinion of the majority and clearly wished for my ascension. As such, I considered the personal conversation over, nodded, and switched to business. Have you any word of my father from your network?
I do not.
And you believe he will not return?
That I cannot say for certain. Though there has never been a period where Tenyo Azarine has been absent from his castle for so many unexcused days.
I reached out over the railing, toward the rushing water, calling for the mist. I concentrated, allowing the power to pool in my heart, and pulled with my sorcery. A small storm gathered in my hands. Watching the mist turn into tiny thunderheads and feeling rain begin to fall onto my palms, I absently asked, Then why do I have this overwhelming sensation that he lives? Thalaja sighed.
I don't know, Lady Mairynne.
Silence, except for rushing water and tiny sounds of thunder, cocooned us on the balcony. Calling on my magic offered a much-needed distraction and allowed an idea to bloom in the back of my mind. Storms keep annals. The histories of our people written by rulers through the ages would surely offer guidance. I clapped my hands together, extinguishing the storm, and said, I think...
What?
He searched my face.
What do you think?
I glanced at him with a quirked brow and grin. You, and everyone else, will see. Turning to the arched entry, I called the wind for assistance with my burdening robes and walked lightly and swiftly toward the foyer. Behind me, Thalaja's heels clicked upon the marble as he followed. My sisters, their advisors, and the clergy still loitered in the foyer, likely awaiting my return. Jessa rushed toward me when I emerged. Mairynne, Evangale, and the clergy turned, but Yasmin and Nestrine continued in their whispered conversation. I lowered my eyes, feeling a stab of jealousy over their happiness. But I refocused quickly. Jessa, I said, send word to each member of Tenyo Azarine's advisory council that we will meet first thing on the morrow within the royal court. Of course, Lady Mairynne. Jessa curtsied, then scurried to the bridge and onward to complete the chore I'd demanded. Yasmin turned, alerted by my command. Mairynne took a breath to speak. Before she could utter words, I held up both hands to forestall her and said, My sisters, Hallow Gallus of the Triad, and Immarizal and Nestrine as first advisors, you will be in attendance as well at the 9th bell. Mairynne asked, What is the meaning of the meeting? You will learn with the others. Yasmin, can you ensure that Aunt Nadia Lean receives word and is present as well? She nodded, seeming uncertain and startled by the sudden demands, which worked well to my taste. My intent could remain a mystery for the time being. I turned to Thalaja before anyone else could utter more questions. I thought to ask for his company, but reconsidered and demanded, You will escort me to the royal library.